Karen, back all the way from Seattle this time, going south. All right, have a safe trip back. I think someone must have got the word out we're going to talk about money tonight, and they didn't want to come. But actually, we're not talking about money. We're talking about a more important subject, and we'll introduce it here and then spend our time talking about it. In America, we like to be free, don't we? And so people really protest. They dislike being told what to do. After all, it's my life, and I'll live it the way I want to. And that's pretty much the mantra of society today. But yet, for a Christian, we understand that there's a whole different reality in which we live under. It's challenging. Perhaps it's one of the most challenging principles to master in our life. And it's the principle of Christian stewardship. And I have a handout. If you didn't get it, they were in the back. If there aren't any left, $1 and I'll get you one. Money, right? No, I'm just joking. We can print some more. But Christian stewardship is very important because we're talking about God and ourselves, all right? And the principle is really we're stewards and we're not owners. That's really the principle in a nutshell. We own nothing on this earth. We are just stewards of that which God has given us. And so the principles I want to deal with, follow this morning's lesson because we talked about how to lay up treasures in heaven. And laying up treasures is not a difficult thing. It's just doing those simple acts of service to one to another that lays up or treasures up those storehouses of riches in heaven. Look with me in 1 Timothy chapter 6 in verse 17 through 19, because this captures our whole lesson tonight in a nutshell. Where Paul ends this letter to Timothy evangelist, and it's striking that he ends with this instruction for the rich. Now, before you read this, a lot of times when we hear the rich, we think, those who are, 10 times more wealthy than I. Now, could we make a case that everyone has a degree of wealth here in this room? Yes, no one walked to services today. Is that true? Right? Everyone has a home. Probably everyone here has a cell phone, and your children have a cell phone. I imagine no one watches the tube TV. Are any tube TVs left? Oh, well, is that your main one or your third one? Second one. All right, thank you. Or at least you're being honest. You have an LCD for a regular TV or a plasma or something. We're wealthy, aren't we? All right? So this message applies to each and every one of us. Instruct those who are rich in this present world. That's check. Not to be conceited or fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, because we know we're going to lose them all. But on God. Why God? Who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Everything we have comes from God. And one of the principles of his stewardship, he wants us to enjoy some of the things that he's given us. It's not wrong to have possessions, enjoy them. Isn't that what it says? He richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. But on the same time, he gives us a responsibility. Here's the instruction. Instruct them to do good. To be rich, not in material things, but I want you to be wealthy in good works. To be generous, ready to share. Isn't that what we talked about this morning? The simple acts of service. And by doing so, verse 19, they'll be storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future. So they can take hold of what is life indeed, real life. And it's life in heaven. It's the riches and they're unfathomable up there. So let's talk about stewardship. Now, what we want to do is establish some principles. The first one is to understand everything belongs to God. So everything I have belongs to God. Everything that I have has been given to me by God. And everything that has been given to me, I've been entrusted with by the Lord. And everything I've been entrusted with by the Lord, it's to be used for his will and his glory, not mine. And everything he entrusts with me to manage for him, I'm going to be held accountable of how I managed it. Now, that's what we want to see in a nutshell. Now, it's not going to be that difficult because we're going to spend a quick time showing that everything's God's. That's the foundation principle. If you get that part, you'll get the rest of the lesson. Everything belongs to God. And everything you possess, from your money to your home, to your time, to your abilities, to opportunities you come the way, everything belongs to God. Now, if we own that and accept that, stewardship then just naturally follows. So we're going to look at a bunch of scriptures, and they're in your handout. We won't read them because that's not the point. I just want to overwhelm you with just this central theme in the Bible. It's all God's. And so we'll look through that as we go through this idea of stewardship. First of all, Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14, he spoke to Abraham. Blessed be Abraham, the most God most high, the possessor of the heavens and the earth. Now, Abraham acknowledged that later when he speaks to the king of Sodom, quoting the same thing. God, the possessor of the heaven and the earth. Job, why do I put him back there? Job was a patriarch. He lived in this time frame. And God is challenging Job. He says, Job, who has given to me that I should repay him? Can we give anything to God that he owes us back? To give to God suggests that it was ours to begin with, and he owes me. And the question is, obviously, nobody. Because he says, whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. Now, what does whatever leave out? Everything. Now, I know we all in our mind, yeah, that's true, but except for this in my house, or except for my TV, or except, no, we feel like some things are our own. And they're not. They all belong to God. Now, the Christian is the only one that's going to acknowledge this. So we go on. And we see the other scripture that deal with the same thing. Moses repeated this in Deuteronomy when he gave the law the second time. To the Lord your God belong heaven and the highest heaven and the earth and all that is in it. So as far as you look into the skies and the heavens, the stars and the galaxies, as close as you look into the earth, everything belongs to God. He owns it. Psalms, we find David understood it. The earth is the Lord and all that it contains. The world, and now he's getting specific, those who dwell in it. You and I belong to the Lord. Now for the Christian, we echo that. Your life is not your own. Paul said, I've died and I now live with Christ, or in Christ. In Psalms 89, the heavens are yours, the earth also is yours, the world and all that it contains. So let's go on. Psalms 95. The mountains and the seas. Now, why does he go skies, earth, mountains, seas? What is he trying to impress? Everything you look at. And we look at the mountains and go, whoa, they're so majestic. Then you look at the seas and wow, they're just so beautiful. We love going to the mountains and we love going to the ocean. And the best places where you go to the mountains and the oceans where they come together. Isn't that all right? You have both extremes, and he says, the peaks of the mountains are his also. And the sea is his, because it was he who was the one that made it. We see the same thing in Psalms 104. Man goes forth his work to his labor and evening. God doesn't have to, because he made it all. The earth is full of his possession. Now, we're familiar with this passage, Psalms chapter 50. We've heard it. Every beast of the forest is mine. Every one. The cattle on 1,000 hills. That means every cow on every hill belongs to Jehovah. Every bird, everything that moves in the field, that's the grasshopper, the snake, they're all God's. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine. And it all contains. Now, why would you tell someone you're hungry? Why would you tell someone you're hungry? Because you're making a request, feed me. Isn't that why? I'm hungry, Dave. And he'd say, talk to my wife. Right? No, he wouldn't just send me down the road, would he? And the Lord says, I'm not going to tell you if I'm hungry. Why does he say that? Because everything's mine. I can just take whatever I want. I have no need from anything from you. I need nothing from you. Now we'll build on that. All the silver and the gold, he says, is mine. And Paul even argues this when he's making his argument in Acts chapter 10. The earth is the Lord and all it contains. Now, can we just accept everything belongs to God? That includes you, my life, my spouse's life, my children's life, everything. And that means all my possessions too. My money, my home, my time, my energy, my intellect. It all belongs to God. So the question is, what am I going to do with it? I think it was Burkett that first used this example when he's talking about money and stewardship. He says, a banker is the best example of a stewardship. Now, on the bottom of your sheet on the 4th page, we have the definition of a stewardship. In the Bible, it's a compound word of house and law. So it means the law of the house. Oikonomos, you see it there? And so it's someone that manages the house. So often you would have a free servant that you would put in charge of your property to manage the affairs. Other slaves, the cattle, the vineyards, whatever it may be. They were to manage it as a steward, and they'd report to you. Now, did it belong to them as a steward? No. Were they supposed to turn a profit and make sure that the master's interests are achieved? Yes. And so that's what a steward means. And actually, we get the word economy from the same word. So money is uniquely tied to stewardship, but stewardship does not mean money. It means management of the property or that which belongs to another. And that's what God is imposing upon all of us. Since everything belongs to Him, anything you have has been entrusted to you as a steward. We're all stewards. And God is asking us to manage what He has given to you for His benefit and not our own. So the example is of a banker. Is that a perfect example of a stewardship? We all deposit our money into a bank, and their job is to be managers or stewards of that money. They invest it, protect it, to bring a return to you, some interest on your savings. I know it's pitiful on a savings account, but if you buy CDs or if it's a brokerage, they'll invest it in funds for you, and they keep it safe. So when you go there, the money can be drawn out, hopefully with some interest. Now, what if the banker started acting like an owner when it came to all that money that was deposited in his bank? He said, well, I'm going to take some of this and put it in my personal account. I'm going to take some of this money, deposit it all by you. I'm going to buy a vacation home on the coast so I can look at that ocean. When you start thinking owner rather than steward, do we have problems? That guy would be taken up and charged with federal crimes, right? Against banking laws, and you would be up in arms with yourself. So if we expect that type of faithfulness from our banker, is it not fair to ask the same thing of ourselves as stewards of which God has entrusted to us? It's not ours. And when we start acting like an owner, we start using it for our benefit exclusively and not for what it was intended, and that's God's glory. Does that make sense? So, man, that's a whole different perspective. That changes everything. Well, it's actually liberating. So here's the stewardship principle. We are managers of what God has entrusted. What does the idea of entrust mean? I'm giving this to you to take care of for me. I'm trusting you with it. And I'm giving you an opportunity and ability, and I want you to use it for my benefit, to manage it. And when you entrust somebody with something, there's responsibility and accountability built in. You're responsible for its care, and you're going to be accountable to me when I ask you what you have done with it. Is that not correct? And so we see that in this stewardship principle. And first of all, this is the fundamental principle, this idea that God owns everything. And I just have to clarify some things. Because you say, well, He gives us things. We read that in 1 Timothy. He gives us all things to enjoy. And you might think Acts chapter 5. Remember Ananias and Sapphira? When they sold their property, even Peter said, when it was yours, then couldn't you do what you wanted? So we think, don't we own things? Well, when we own something, we don't own it in the sense that it's ours. It's not given to us in the sense that we have ownership of it. It is given to us in the sense that we are entrusted with it by God to manage it. So it's ours, but only to manage as a steward for God. That's the only sense that we own it. We don't own it personally. You see the difference? You say, well, how do you get that? Well, first of all, let me just note a couple things. The scriptures are there for you, and we don't have them. First of all, God's the one that gives you the ability and the power to make wealth. That's in your text. It's found in Deuteronomy. And a lot of times people think, man, I did this all by myself because I'm so rich or so smart or whatever. No, God gives you the ability mentally or physically. He gives you the opportunity. He gives the power and strength to make wealth. And it doesn't come from ourselves. So even when I make it, I can't claim it as my own. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 7. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low and he also exalts. Proverbs chapter 10. It is the blessing of the Lord that makes rich. We have to understand that. Even when we use the opportunities God gives us as stewards and they produce something, it's thanks be to God. He's the one that's done it, working through me. So what we have been given to us by God is given to us to manage for Him. So let's look at Matthew 25. Now I'm going to assume y'all have you have an understanding of the parable of the talents. Talents doesn't mean ability, it means money. So this is really the parable of money that's entrusted to his servants. And so we have this master who's obviously wealthy. He's going to go on a journey. He calls in his slaves, and notice verse 14. He entrusted his possessions to them. This is stewardship, isn't it? When you're entrusting them. So the verse 15, to one, notice the word, he gave 5 talents. That's 5 sums of money. It's quite a large sum. To another, he gave 2, and to another 1. And he gave to each according to their ability to manage it. See, God knows how much you can manage as a faithful steward. And then he went on his journey. Now, did he give it to them so they could own it? It does say he gave it to them, though, right? But he's entrusting them. In other words, I'm giving you temporary possession of this, but make sure you understand it's still mine. Just like making deposits in the bank doesn't own it, but they have temporary custody or possession of it. It belongs to the master still. So they went out, the first 2, invested it wisely, and doubled the amount of money given to them. And so when the master comes back, there's responsibility, and now there's accountability. He calls them in verse 19, to settle accounts. In other words, let's find out how faithful you were as a steward. So we'll just talk about the first one, because the second person said the same thing about him. Then we'll finally just make a peek at the third. So the one, verse 20, who had received the 5 measures of money, 5 talents, he came up and brought 5 more. He doubled it. And he said, Master, notice the language, he acknowledges it wasn't his. You entrusted me. It wasn't mine. You didn't give me title to it. I didn't have ownership. It was your money. But you let me manage it for you. You entrusted me with 5 talents. And he says, see, I have gained 5 more. Now notice what the master said to him. Well done. Well done. Now who is the master in this scenario? It's God, isn't it? He's saying, well done. And he goes on, he says, well done, you're good and faithful. See, what's required of a steward, 1 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul says, we're stewards of the gospel, and what's required of a steward is one thing, be faithful. You don't use it for yourself, and you don't be lazy on the job. You maximize your time and your opportunities. You be faithful. And so he said, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. It was 5 large measures of money. I'm going to put you in charge of many. So here's another principle we're going to learn. If you're faithful in a few things, God will give you more. Now, what about the third servant? He comes in and says, well, I was scared. We're all the way down in verse 24. I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. I went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, I didn't do anything with it. But at least I'm giving you back what you had. He said, you wicked, lazy slave. He said, you ought to put my money in the bank. I could at least got interest. Verse 28, here it is. Take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. He who has faithful in a little will be faithful in more. He'll be given a lot. And that's what he says, verse 29. To him who has, he shall be given, and he who has, until he has an abundance. But the one who does not have, even what he does have, will be taken away. Cast him out, this worthless slave, in outer darkness. There's the principle of responsibility and accountability. So God gives us time, opportunities, and abilities, and money. It's not all about money. But he gives us stuff. And he says, I want you to manage it for me, not for yourself. Enjoy some of it as you're going through life. He gives us all things richly to enjoy. But don't get caught up in enjoying them only for yourself. Because of this, I want you to see this. It's very important. Every decision you make is a spiritual decision. You cannot separate your life into the secular world and then the spiritual world. William and where is... Oh, right there. What's her name? Selena. Gifts of God, right? Who do they belong to? They're not your children, they're God's. Now, yeah, we're raising them and we have legal rights to them, but for the Christian, we understand they're given to us by God. And there's stewardship involved, isn't there? Responsibility and accountability. And even though they're physical beings, can I just keep them in the secular world? Or is everything that happens with those children really a spiritual decision? How I discipline them? What allowances I give as far as liberties of things they can do growing up? What I let them watch on TV and who friends I allow them to show up with or play with. Everything, we might think it's a secular decision, but it has spiritual consequences, doesn't it? Even the food that I feed them. Everything, since it's God, he's asking us to manage it to his glory. You say, well, even the car that I drive? Yeah, because if I'm going to buy a car because I want a $100,000 Tesla and I can't afford it, but I want one anyway, could I manage to buy one? Yeah, but would other things suffer if I did that? You say, well, that's just a physical decision. No, it's a spiritual one. It's a spiritual one. There are no non-spiritual decisions because it's overarching. Everything is God's. He has entrusted it to us. And so every decision I make has serious spiritual implications. That's why Paul says, whatever you do in word or deed, do all to the glory of God. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 11. You know, let him who speaks or let him serve, what? Serve by the strength which God supplies him. And let it all be done to his glory. So when I'm speaking, make sure I speak as the utterances of God. Not what I want. I'm managing his words for him. And when I'm serving for him. And so we look at a couple more points that we can make. God's going to hold us accountable, isn't he? Every one of us. Every one of us. And we have to understand that if it's going to be done for his glory, then as we already read in 1 Corinthians 4, he expects us to be faithful. I want you to just take a peek back at 1 Chronicles 29. I have enough time. I think this one's rather stunning. It was mentioned during the Lord's Supper how they brought the ark in. Well, in 1 Chronicles, they take a collection for the temple. David wasn't allowed to build it. Solomon would, but he collected all the gold and the resources for it. So in chapter 29, verse 7, they gave 5,000 talents and 10,000 derricks of gold, 10,000 talents servant, 18,000 talents of brass, 100,000 talents of iron. And it just goes on. Precious stones. It was all into the treasury. Verse 9, the people rejoiced because they were offered so willingly. For they made their offerings to the Lord with a whole heart. And the King David also rejoiced greatly. I mean, it was this huge outpouring of gifts. So verse 10 is where we want to read. Read with me, please. So David blessed the Lord in the sight of all the assembly. And David said, blessed are you, O Lord God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. Indeed, everything that is in the heavens, on the earth, yours is dominion. O Lord, and you exalt yourself as head over all. See, he's acknowledging God is in charge. It's all his. Verse 12, both riches and honor, they come from you. And you rule over all. And in your hand is power and might. And it lies in your hand to make great and to strengthen everyone. Now, therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. Now, here it is. Here's the question. He's just exalted God and put him in his right place. And now his attention turns to himself and the people. But who am I? And who are my people that we should be able to offer as generously as this? For all things come from you. And from your hand we have given you. What is he saying? We haven't given anything to you that wasn't yours already. You gave us possession of it for a while, and we have just returned it as an offering, and we're excited about it, but it was yours in the first place. He understands the significance of stewardship. Verse 15, for we are sojourners before you, and tenants, as all our fathers' words, our days on the earth like a shadow, and there is no hope. He understands his position on this earth is really a one just here for a little while to manage for God what God has entrusted to him. So, stewardship. Why should I help other people with acts of service? You can say, well, because God commanded, love one another. Well, out of gratitude. Well, because he loved us. Those are all true. But the answer I want to give to you, it's a matter of stewardship. See, God is asking you to be his agent on this earth, his representative. So if Jesus was actually walking on the earth and he saw someone with a legitimate need and he had the ability to meet that need, would Jesus meet it? But he's not on this earth, but we are. His body, his hands, his feet. So we have to think of ourselves as his agent on this earth. When we encounter those people, we are doing it for him, and he's actually doing it through us. Remember what we said this morning, when you do it to the least of these, you've done it to me. We are his agents. And that's why it's not just about money. Ray was here this morning. I should have used him as an example. Jesus said, when you're sick, you visited me when I was sick. I've mentioned this, and a lot of you have experienced it. When it comes to opportunities and time, Ray excelled in being good steward of those two things. When someone is sick, you could not beat him to the hospital or that person's house. He was there. I don't know how he found out about it, but he got there quickly because he was visiting. And was he laying up treasures in heaven? He was maximizing his opportunity and the time that God had given him. See, it's not just about money. It's about everything God gives us. It's your abilities. Some people teach. Some people oversee VBS. Other people mow lawns. It's anything you do. When you go to work, how hard do you work? You work as though you're working for the Lord because you're a good steward of your time, your energy, and you work as hard as you can because you're trying to glorify God in your life. So that's why. Does someone have a $100 bill? Then we'll close. Well, can I see it? Oh, Dorothy, I hate to pick on her, but... Oh, you have one. Chuck, good. I don't mind using your $100 bill. All right. Did you steal this?
Sure.
Yeah. I know you're a CPA. Did you find it?
In my wallet.
Yeah. Did your wife give it to you or anyone?
Oh, no.
So you worked for it.
Correct.
Right. So could we say this is Chuck's $100 bill? So the question is, why should I give this that I worked hard for? And if you had $100, you worked hard for it, and it means something. You wouldn't want to just lose it, would you? Why? What rationale is there that I would take this and give it to someone else or buy something with it to give someone else? What's the rationale that I would use? What's the basis when I would give up this hard-earned money for anybody else who didn't work for it, that are not entitled to it, they don't have any ownership for it? It's just a free gift. And here's the answer. Well, it's love, but in tonight's lesson, what is it? This is not Chuck's. This is not Chuck's money, is it? In fact, it says, in God we trust. Is this Chuck's money? Whose is it? Now, do you acknowledge that? That's God's money. And anything you have in your wallet, it's not yours. Yes, you are in possession of it, but you're using it as stewards for God's glory. So when I understand that and grasp it, I'm willing to let go of this because I know God is working through me to bless others as he has taken care of me. So since this is not Chuck's money, thank you. See, he still owns it, doesn't he? No, it's because he's being a good steward. He's just not going to give it away frivolously. If it gets to you, fine. All right. You know, that's just a silly illustration, but we own these things emotionally, don't we? And we have to start thinking on this broader plane, it's God's. And when I truly am generous, and it might just be $5. It might be just a visit at the hospital. It might be just helping babysit one of those triplets while the mother's in the hospital. Isn't that using opportunities as stewards? We're laying up treasures in heaven, and we're giving glory to God. Isn't that beautiful to think I could be God's agent and his representative, his ambassador on this earth? What a privilege. And when I'm faithful in that, he's going to give me more possessions, more assets, more resources to do more. And the reason some people don't have much as Christians, because as God knows, we can't handle the little things we already have. Well, that's our lesson. And I hope it's positive and uplifting. It shows a huge responsibility, but that's how we can make these great deposits in heaven, storing up treasures in heaven. If you're with us, we can help you. We're going to sing a song. The battle belongs to the Lord. Even the victory's his. It's already been decided. Get on his side. If we can help you, we'll see you in heaven together.